Welcome to today's explainer. So, I want you to start by imagining a very specific fantasy. Picture waking up tomorrow morning and realizing that heavy, sinking feeling in your chest, the one that immediately follows a mistake, a poor decision, or maybe a hurtful word, is just completely gone, literally vanished into thin air. Now, for most of us, navigating life without that feeling sounds incredibly appealing, right? But is it actually? Today, we're unpacking the hidden psychology of a guilt-free mind based on some truly eye-opening psychological insights. Because for the vast majority of us, guilt acts as a vital psychological guardrail. It's essentially the emotional barrier keeping us connected to our deepest values and, of course, to the people around us that we care about. But that brings us to a massive underlying question. What actually happens when that psychological guardrail just disappears? If you never felt guilt again, would you experience total freedom? Or would that actually be a glaring sign that something has gone deeply, deeply wrong with your internal feedback system? Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp the impact of losing this emotion, we have to ground ourselves in reality and define what it actually is. Guilt isn't just feeling sad, it is a highly tuned internal mechanism designed to literally force self-confrontation. When someone stops feeling guilt, they don't just magically become happier or carefree. Instead, they enter this bizarre state where their brain can no longer process the emotional cost of their own actions. They lose the ability to measure the real impact they have on the world. And to see how this plays out in real life, our source research points us toward 5 key psychological insights.
Insight number 1, permanent responsibility avoidance.
The research tells us that accepting responsibility is inherently difficult for human beings. That's just how we're wired. But a guilt-driven brain actually forces you to confront those uncomfortable truths. Without that emotional engine running, though, a person enters a permanent state of responsibility avoidance. It's wild to see. Suddenly, every single missed deadline at work is just chalked up to bad luck. Or every fight at home is entirely the fault of an unfair partner. By avoiding the sting of guilt, they successfully protect their own ego. But in doing so, they completely, absolutely stall their own personal growth.
Which brings us right to insight number 2, permanently stunted growth.
We love to think that human success and personal evolution are driven entirely by positive inspiration, right? Vision boards, big dreams. But the reality is much grittier than that. Discomfort is often the true catalyst for effort. Guilt sends a very specific, undeniable behavioral command to the brain. Something is wrong and I need to fix it. When someone stops feeling guilt, they just don't receive that command anymore. Sure, they might dream big and have massive goals, but they're going to stay exactly where they are. Why? Because they completely lack the internal pressure required to survive the boredom, the grind, and the repetition that real transformation actually demands. Let's move to our next core concept. Insight number 3, chasing rewards, stalling growth. Now, what's really fascinating here is how the breakdown of the guilt mechanism fundamentally changes decision-making. People who feel guilt possess what we can call a regret filter. We mentally replay bad decisions to avoid future disappointment. But without that filter, you become entirely reward-driven. You start chasing early obsession and instant dopamine hits, whether that's diving into a super risky financial opportunity or just mindlessly scrolling on your phone for another hour because it feels good right now. Because they no longer weigh the potential for future regret, their behavior becomes increasingly unpredictable and honestly, surprisingly mechanical. Moving on to insight number 4, disconnected from the group. So humans naturally want and need to belong to a community. We are literally wired for it from an evolutionary standpoint. But belonging comes with an emotional cost. Guilt is the social glue. It's the exact mechanism that prevents us from hurting the group for our own selfish gain. So when guilt disappears, that social glue just dissolves. A person simply stops identifying with the needs of others. They might physically exist among the group, sure, but they are no longer truly part of it. Let's look at how this plays out in practice. A guilt-free connection is entirely surface level. Because this person actively avoids emotional risk and accountability, they keep their inner world fiercely private. They reveal almost nothing about their true motives to the people around them. And what's super interesting about this is that on the outside, this person might just look wildly independent, totally self-sufficient. But the reality, that false independence is just a thick shield of self-protection against the emotional risks of deep, genuine human connection. And this leads us to the 5th and deepest psychological layer we are exploring today. Insight number 5, a fragmented and fluid identity. For a lot of us, our painful mistakes and our deepest regrets are tied directly to our identity. It is exactly how we learn who we are and who we want to be.
Now, people who secretly struggle with self-worth often attach their failures to their identity far too strongly. But a guilt-free person has the exact opposite problem. They have zero unresolved patterns to process. There are no mistakes they're actively trying to make amends for, and because they aren't processing anything, they fall into a chaotic state known as identity frustration.
Because of this intense identity frustration, they are constantly seeking an overnight new life. They're the ones who will suddenly change careers or relationships or move to new cities, desperately hoping to finally find themselves. But they can't. They constantly seek this overnight fix because they lack the internal anchor of accountability, holding them to their past actions. Without a past that you own and acknowledge, you just can't build a stable future identity. Which brings us to our resolution, embracing your internal guardrail. It is officially time to reframe this uncomfortable emotion. The absence of guilt isn't some cool superpower to be envied. It's a broken feedback loop. To fix it, you have to actually allow yourself to experience the discomfort of a mistake. You have to stop avoiding the emotional cost. You gotta pay the toll. That stinging pain? That is profound proof that you are building a strong foundation and taking real ownership of your life. True maturity only begins when you stop dodging the pain of your errors and start leveraging it as pure fuel for real, tangible growth. I want to end today's explainer by leaving you with a question to think about. Which painful mistakes from your past are actually the foundation of your maturity today? Take a second to really think about that and try to reframe those heavy moments not as burdens, but as the literal building blocks of who you are. If you enjoyed diving into the hidden psychology behind everyday behavior with me today, make sure to hit subscribe. Because once you start understanding the small things that shape people's lives, you begin noticing patterns that most people completely overlook. Thanks for learning with me, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.